Hello, everybody. Welcome to the the holiday episode. I don't want to say Christmas episode. This is the holiday episode for our History Matters and Sodas coffee. And I will let Joanne take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and happy holidays to everyone. So the story of today's episode it's a little bit of a road, a tangled road. I'm going to take you down the road with me because when Matt and I have always planned to at least have some kind of a History Matters segment, even on holidays, to put up so that we don't miss a week. And we are there for you, the History Matters community. So I thought, okay, what would I talk about for Christmas? What can I talk about for Christmas and the holidays and December and vacation, whatever? There must be something I can think of in the past that I can use to talk about this time of year in some way that will be historical and yet meaningful. And I dug around and I was not becoming very excited and happy about things I was finding, other, random quotes here and there. And then I stumbled across a statement. So the Founders Online database is a fine thing. And it's from the National Archives. And it's the papers of, Washington, Madison, Jefferson, Hamilton, Franklin. It's an amazing database. It's free. It's just there online. So when all else fails, I can go to Founders Online and dig around strategically and find things. And one of the things that I found was a letter. There was a letter from Jefferson, and there were minutes from a meeting, and from 1828. And what they both suggested was, I think the Jefferson's letter says something like, this year we're done with letting them go for a holiday recess. They're gonna have a longer summer break, no recess, because of the unfortunate and injurious actions of the recent past, right? So I'm reading this and I'm like, ooh. What happened during the holiday that they're like, we're done with holidays, no more Christmas vacation, none of that, we're done. The students are going to stay here. So I thought this will be an excellent story for History Matters. So I began digging around. First, I went back to Founders Online. I dug around. That's when I found the minutes of the meeting in which they were like, yes, we will no longer allow the students to leave for the holiday winter recess. Like, okay, I know it really happened and something bad happened that caused it. And I didn't see really much more. I even found a few people involved in the University of Virginia. At this time, it was called Central College. And none of them was really talking about whatever had happened. So then I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll go onto Google Books, which is also a sort of early place I go when I really want to look for something. And if you haven't guessed by this point, I will say at this point, this is a historian story for you for the Christmas/holiday season, because that's essentially what I'm doing for you, is what as a historian I did to try and find a story to tell you. So that is what I'm regaling you with. So I know 1827, I think something bad happened. 1828, they decide no more holidays at Central College, UVA in Virginia. Google Books, after Founders Online lets me down, Google Books is vast and it only has weird random things, so it's certainly not comprehensive. But again, if you do really smart searches on Google Books, sometimes you find a stray piece of information, particularly since they have weird 19th century things that you would be hard to find anywhere else, and sometimes are the perfect thing for you to get a piece of evidence. So I'm Googling all over the place, and I'm looking at books, and I'm limiting the search to only books in the 19th century, only books from the early 19th century, only books. So I'm trying really hard, a bunch of sort of strategic searches. So in the process of doing strategic searches, it's a hard word, strategic searches, I find a variety of things. I find that UVA or Central College students were not really necessarily very well behaved some of the time, right? So I'm looking for the bad thing that happened in 1827. And what I see is a variety of different episodes of students in taverns, having a lot to drink. There was one student who came to Charlottesville from Baltimore with his entire I guess, semesters worth of funding money that was supposed to last him through the semester. And by the time he'd gotten part way down to Charlottesville, he had spent it all, and he had to borrow money to get down to the college. So what I saw was a lot of young Southern men being irresponsible, throwing money around, drinking wildly. I didn't necessarily see dueling pistols or wild horse racing, but I'm sure there's some there. So I know something happens in 1827. I know it happened because there's minute meetings in Jefferson and a policy change. Now I know that generally speaking, Central College students are not exactly a silent and well-behaved bunch. But that said, then what happened in 1827 is even worse than the drunken guys spending all their money. Like, what is it that was so bad? And here's the ultimate, the most historian-esque, let me try that again, historian-esque aspect of this tale I am regaling you with, which is that after looking around all over the place and then going back to regular Google and looking at things and databases about UVA, and I put in some time. And at the end of the semester, I have to say, I'm patting myself on the back because I got very determined. And I never found out what the thing was in 1827. And here's why I'm telling this story. So initially, when I was like, what am I going to talk to people about? I'll find a good story. This seemed like it was going to become a good story. Then it didn't become a good story because it never finished itself. And then I decided that's maybe the ultimate tribute to history, right? It's what historians do, is they piece things together with the pieces that are available to them, using smart searching strategies, thinking in the language of the time as far as their own language, looking for clues that might lead to other clues, and hoping that Newbie has a lot to say on this too. Thank you, Newbie. Hoping that the clues add up to something. Now, in this case, I saw a lot about college student misbehavior in the South and Southern college boys. It wasn't a surprise to me, but seeing it all at once like this was certainly striking. It's a reminder of the South in this time period. Not that the North is that well behaved, but I think Southern boys, and particularly UVA, Central College boys, had a reputation for being a little wild and crazy. So I learned things about the time period. Newbie learned a lot too. Yeah, what else, noobs? You got more to say? At any rate, that is my story for you, is the story that doesn't have an ending. But then I felt, as a historian, I did need to provide you with a story. So this is a random piece of evidence that often week to week, that's what I offer as the starting point of some of the themes and ideas that I address from week to week. It has to do with a piece of evidence that I remember. And this is just, it's a holidays-ish letter, mostly because the image it provides, I think, is going to be what's happening even in small family clusters. This just struck me as such a weirdly modern image, even though it's not. And it's something, I can't even tell you when. There was an Abigail Adams letter that she was writing, I think, to John Quincy Adams, who I believe was overseas. And she talks to him for a little while about something. And then there's just a throwaway sentence in it. And it says something like, your father is just now dragging one of his grandchildren back and forth across the floor on a chair. And what I love about that is it's a grandpa thing, right? It's like, it's what you do with kids, right? And that's just not how we see John Adams. And in my mind, that's how I like to picture the holidays, is even if we're in smaller clusters, people getting together and doing family things. And so that's a weird early American family thing that is weirdly modern as well. And Newbie likes the story too. I think that's actually kind of oodling. That's a little oodly. So he's really pitching in with the holiday greetings. But anyway, that's my story. My story is the story of a historian who tried to find things and came up with some. And Newbie, I think, is frustrated because he wanted the ending. I'm sorry, noobs, but you know.
I love it. I love it. This is fantastic. So we're going to try this. We have 3 or 4 questions from nobody whatsoever. So I'm going to make sure that, I'm not going to put on the hats of our super fans who ask questions every week, but we're going to try a couple hopefully softball questions for a holiday episode, to follow up on some things Joanne was talking about, to try to extend our conversation here and have a little bit of fun. So I love this idea of founders. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, for those who know of Newbie, he's oodling. For you, he's oodling. I just wanted to point that out. There's actual oodle. So anyway, go on. You love the idea of that.
So no, anyway, I love this idea of the founders as human beings, right? Like this, it's just a grandpa, right? You know, and so and the background of this is when I taught along, a million years ago, one of the things that I always try to do is humanize the founders, because we have this sort of reverence for them, and
right.
I think we both pretty much agree with that. I guess can we talk a little bit, or maybe can you talk just a little bit about this idea of humanizing these people that we revere as a historian?
Sure. And I mean, I think to understand history, you have to restore or include its humanity. And I mean that on a really human level, right? The reality of the human experience, the way people are making decisions or even not making decisions, but the ground level experience of what's going on. But in the case of the founders, and so this is something I've thought about and experienced a lot because I've taught it a lot at Yale. We have so many of courses and so much mythology invested in, all capital letters, the founding, right? The founding happened, and the events in the founding happened with the glorious demigod founders who did the glorious demigod things they did as founders. And then we had a nation and everything was wonderful. And they all went home and dragged their grandchildren around on chairs, right? I mean, but we mythologize them as though there was this golden pathway to nationhood. And that does such a disservice to how we understand our history. First off, we've never had a golden moment in American history. There has not been a golden moment in American history. It just doesn't exist, which is not to say that there haven't been good things that have happened, but there have been things that are not good right alongside them, right? And to really understand who we are, we have to have the whole shebang. We have to have the good and the bad. We have, as I talked about in a previous week, we have to have the ideals and the realities. And that's just as true with the founders, is if you strip them of their humanity, you actually remove the actual founding, which was a story of struggle and ideals and not meeting ideals, right? It's a struggle. It was not easy for them, and it was a struggle, and they came out of it with a mixed bag of responses. If you strip away their humanity, you strip away really the meaning and essence of how our country began, right? Mm-hmm. You have to, and we're in such a moment when people are talking about the good and the bad in history, and how do we talk about people. Anytime you just sort of put a halo around someone and suggest that they're a superhuman hero that needs to be, bowed down to in some way, you have removed them from history. You have removed them from where they came from. You make it impossible to understand how and why they did what they did. It's the most ahistorical thing you can possibly do. So I think, I think we have to wrestle with the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. And I think we're in the middle of a moment that is going to continue, in which we really are talking about what do we say, who do we say it about, who gets included more than in the past in the American narrative. And this question about the founders being mythologized is part of that bigger conversation.
Yeah, I mean, just Washington by himself, right? Like this is, he is a person that we of course revere, and he led the country through the colonies, I should say, through the Revolutionary War, and he did, but he was also a man who wore the teeth of other human beings, right? Like his false teeth are not wooden; correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a person who
some of them were, yeah.
Some of them were, yeah. But he was also a person who freed, quote unquote, freed his slaves when he in his will. But he was also a person
after his wife died.
His wife, yeah. But he's also a person who pursued slaves like own a judge. Like the complexity is where the stories are at. And I love the way that you tell these stories. If I may gush on you just a little bit here. But I love the way you tell these stories throughout all of these episodes that we've done, because you are really attentive to that complexity, and you do a really nice job of showing the humanity of the people that we talk about. And I just want to say that publicly for.
Well, thank you, Matt. And here's a way or a thing to think about in relation to this. So yeah, the thing that particularly interests me is people making choices and understanding the people and their landscape of choice possibilities, and then why they made the choices they made. So that's how I do my history. But think about the moment that we're in, and beam yourself ahead in time, and you're a historian looking back at this moment. It would be easy to, look down from high above and say, and then this happened, and people did this, and this happened, and there was a wave of this. Imagine how much more meaningful and revealing that story would be if you show or understood what it was like to be on the ground making decisions, even for the leaders to be not some great bunch of, people in high office doing a variety of things, but making choices, and some of them really bad choices. And why did they make those bad choices? And what do those bad choices suggest about an administration, a government, a moment in time, to get at the complexity of this moment, which is beyond complex, and the lived reality of this moment, which is going to be hard for anyone to put into words who's lived through it. Imagine trying to do that without grasping the lived experience of this moment. You can't do it. It's the lived experience that's part of what is driving it, right? It's like hundreds and thousands of people are getting sick and dying, and we're seeing that, and some people are responding and some aren't. And that fact in and of itself becomes a piece of historical evidence. What does that mean? What does it show us? So yeah, I don't think all history has to be the same, and I don't think every historian has to do the same thing and do the same kind of history that I do. But I think particularly if you're talking about things that end up being, in the American narrative writ large, creating heroes that have no flaws it is fantasy land. It just doesn't exist. And it does a disservice to really understanding what happened in the past and how we got to where we are now.
Well, that's incredibly helpful. And so I'm going to ask one more question and see where this goes.
Okay.
One of I love that you shared this story, because I think people don't realize how many dead ends we hit as historians and history educators, right? This idea that you're going after it, and you just happen, and you either hit a dead end or you happen across some sort of something by happenstance. I'm reading Humankind right now, which is this lovely book, which I recommend to everybody if you haven't read it. But they sort of tells the story of the real Lord of the Flies, where these six kids get stuck on an island, and how the person who was researching it sort of stumbles across the evidence that I think it's that he needed. So could you maybe just say a few more words about this idea that, we're all these we hit dead ends, right? You're digging and digging and digging, and sometimes you just can't find the answer. And that doesn't mean that you don't find something useful. Does it?
Right. And you have to be thinking in a couple ways at the same time. So you don't find what you're looking for. Does that mean you're asking the wrong questions? Does that mean you've misunderstood something? Does that mean you're not looking in the right places? Does that mean the thing you're looking for doesn't exist? So that becomes evidence itself. If you look for something and find nothing, that becomes evidence. And in my first book, when I was writing about political gossip, which is it's the second chapter of the book. It's the first chapter that I wrote. It was my master's thesis. And I went to the Library of Congress on the Christmas break that I was allowed to have, and tried to find political gossip, and wasn't finding very much in the letters of the sort of politico folk. And I thought, well, that my career as a historian was brief. It lasted one semester in graduate school. Now it's over. But then I thought, no, why am I not seeing what I'm looking for? And I realized what I was seeing is what I called in the appendix to that book, the ouch factor. What I saw was the ouch after the gossip was offered. People didn't repeat the nasty things that were said. They would be just like, can you believe what so-and-so said about this and such? The ouch. And the ouch ended up being really meaningful, right? Because the ouch is a sign that a line has been crossed. And if you get enough of them, you begin to get an understanding of how people feel it's right to behave or not right to behave, or things to say or not to say. So yeah, we come up against dead ends all the time, or we come up against ends that we don't know if they're dead yet, and you have to just save them and keep them around. And a great example of this is at the beginning of my most recent book, when I was researching at the Library of Congress, I came across a letter from a congressman, and it had a PS in it. And the PS was something like, what do you think about that episode involving tombs? And I read that and I was like, that sounds like it's one of my congressmen behaving badly. Like, that feels to me like it's something I'm supposed to know about, but there's no other information offered. So I stored that away for a really long time, and for years and years and years. And I had I don't know how many years this was, many years later, I had a fellowship at the New York Public Library, and I was doing research and digging around, and lo and behold, in someone's papers, I discover that there was the incident with tombs was a near duel at that time. And I find, a discussion of it in this person's papers, because one of the involved people went to him and began talking about it. So it was like the Hosanna, the holy grail of evidence. But immediately I saw that and I was like, it's the incident with tombs. Like it right. Came together. It took a lot of years, but it came together, and could I guarantee that was going to happen? No, but if you kind of have a grasp of the things you found and things that you have a gut feeling about, that there's meaning there that you need to find, sometimes even without trying, the evidence kind of comes in. There are a handful of specific pieces of evidence that are in my mind because they've never been found. They've been discussed as existing, or someone will say, do you see this letter, or do you? And some of them are in my mind because if I stumble across them, mm-hmm. I will know what they are. And probably not a lot of other people will, only because they didn't stumble across the random piece of evidence that said, hey, I wrote this thing. But, other historians have other things in their mind that they know exist, and they're probably the only ones who do. So yeah, I love the what I call to my students the hunt, which is, hunting down the evidence and seeing mm-hmm. what you find. But as Matt is suggesting here, being aware of what you're not seeing and thinking about what that means is a huge part of the historical process.
Mm-hmm. And I think just because we're always trying to relate to today, I think that relates to today as well, right? Like this idea of, sometimes you feel like the information sort of reaches a dead end, but it will, it's latching on to that little bit and trying to think about how that can, how history will perceive things that are going on today. I don't know.
Even we here now come up against,
right.
actual dead ends, even in the middle of it, right? Mm-hmm. And yet we know there are many things we have a sense about that it's like, yeah, at some point something's going to come out. We're going to understand that a lot better than we are now. So mm-hmm. if we can do that now, translate that into the wider scheme of history.
Right.
It's no wonder it's hard to find things.
Yeah. And it just also reminds me of these, you mentioned, I don't know, probably 4 months ago, it was a long time ago, that moment when you found the hair when you were looking, remember it was hair in a book?
I have several hair stories. Was this the hair that made me jump?
I think it was the hair that made you jump. That's what made me, yes.
Yeah.
Because it was a complete surprise. And that was what I wanted to just touch on is,
yeah,
even when you hit dead ends, sometimes you have these surprises.
Oh yeah.
Right? As historians that just make you like, wait, and you want to, and then you proceed, and then you got that little trail to hunt down.
Right.
I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a great example. It's a great example because of something else I found in the same folder with that. So that was from the New York Historical Society, and I was digging around for my first book, and there was a folder in this box of folders of archival evidence, and it looked like someone had gone to the desk of the person the papers belonged to and just like swept everything off the top of the desk into the folder. So it was like a piece of ribbon, a small piece of paper, and in the midst of this mess was this piece of paper all folded in on itself, which then of course you're like, I wonder what's in this. I guess I'll open it. And when I finally got to the middle of it, it was not a neat like little lock of hair. It was a hairball. It was a blob of someone's hair. I think the hair of the person whose papers it was. And as Matt suggests, I so didn't expect that, and it so didn't look like a neat and tidy lock of hair that I yelped out loud, "Wah!" in the New York Historical Society, which really did not please them. And then I took it and I went up to the desk and I was like, "You have biological matter in this folder." And they were like, "Yeah." And, so basically I then folded it back up and planted it in like this little booby trap for the next person to find. It was like, it didn't matter that it was there. Whatever is in there is in there. So yeah, that was a great example of being surprised. But I then of course continued to dig in that folder because what the heck's in here? Mm-hmm. And this is a folder, I think it was George Clinton of New York. I think it was his papers. The folder had a piece of paper in it. Citizen Genet, who comes to the United States from France and seems to be wanting to rally in 1793 Americans to support the French, and goes above Washington's head to do this to the American public. It's a big controversy. What I found in that folder was a piece of paper that was kind of like an IOU that suggested that Genet bought a copy of the Constitution at around that time. So at some point it was like, IOU, blah, 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 I bought blah, blah, blah. It was like, I'm glad he read the Constitution, because he clearly, he must have been like, what did I do? I just said, he did say he'll go over the head of the president to the American people, but I don't know if he fully realized how horrible that would be to say. So anyway, you do have to always keep your eyes open. Mm-hmm. The whole last book I did, the Field of Blood on physical violence in Congress, that evidence was a surprise. I didn't go to write a book about that. That I stumbled across it. And then it was weird enough that I kept looking for more and more and more. And then finally it was like, okay, well now I have so much evidence that I have to figure it out. But that's to me part of the fun of the hunt, right? Is you really never know what you're going to find. Even the most tried and true subjects. Mm-hmm. There's more evidence. There's different ways of looking at things. There are different things to compare and contrast. There's always something new to be seen, either through new people and new forms of evidence and new stories, or looking at old stories in a different kind of a way. And all of that, writing is difficult. Hunting, I love the hunt. That's my favorite, because you really do never know what you're going to find.
Yeah. The hard part for me for writing isn't having enough stuff. It's deciding what not to write about in some ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if you find that too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that I tell my grad students, and when I teach grad classes, my graduate advisor, Peter Onuf, there were two pieces of advice he gave me over and over and over again. And one of them was, you don't have to say it all now. And I put that on my desk above, like when I was writing, I could see, you don't have to say it all now, because that was necessary. Because I was like, but I haven't yet talked about the evolution of public opinion. It was like, yeah, Joanne, that's not part of this book. So I totally agree. And you can cram some things into footnotes, but then, past a certain point, you have to say no more.
Exactly. Because I was just reflecting on this, because I was trying to take something from my dissertation and put it into a journal article. And the 10,000 word limit was up to 18,000 words or something like that. And I'm like, okay, I can't, I got to start over. Because
how it's a different thing than it should be in the end.
It really is. Yeah.
And this is how well that the History Matters community has me trained, is that I'm imagining in my mind the chat thing and someone on the chat thing saying, what was the second piece of advice that Peter Onuf gave you? Because I said,
yes, what is it? What is it?
Right. I know one of you would ask this. The other one was very focused on me. And it was basically, you have enough evidence, start writing. Mm-hmm. Because I could research forever. And there's a point at which you honestly do have enough evidence, and you will never find it all. And you will never be comprehensive in what you're doing, or rarely. So so those are the two important insights. You have enough research.
That is great advice, because I wish I had that when I was writing my dissertation.
I was very glad for it. I needed it really badly.
Yeah.
You got really quiet, newbie.
My questions bored him.
I guess so.
Well, we've been talking for a while. This has been great.
I'm glad we did this. I know we didn't know what we were going to do during this segment. All I knew is that I was going to tell the story that didn't become a story and make it into a story. So I guess we can sort of sign off. Although you need to talk about your background, and I have a mug. Yes. Before we sign off and wish you all happy holidays. So beforehand, you told me what it was, and I did not know. So I will not guess here, because I would be cheating.
Yes. So I'll move so everybody can see it.
You're out there in the world guessing.
And I see lots of things in the chat, and it is of course the set from White Christmas, which is my favorite holiday movie. So I chose that as my background today. I also want to share with you, I found this, Joanne and I were kicking around ideas. I stumbled across this because as I told Joanne, I went to Poor Richard's Almanac, which all things can be solved with Poor Richard's Almanac, or at least most things, or some things, who knows. But I stumbled across this line, and so I'll share it with you and then let Joanne sign out for the day, which is, now glad the poor with Christmas cheer, thank God you're able so to end the year. So with that, thank you everybody for all of your contributions this year. This has been a lot of fun. And join us next week for our New Year celebration, which you'll see. And with that,
prepared in advance and waiting for you. It will be there. So I also just want to wish everyone a really wonderfully happy holiday. I do have a mug, which felt like the mug that was necessary for a holiday show. And that is the History Matters mug, because the History Matters people, Matt and I and Newbie and all of the others involved in this, wish you happy holidays. And thank you for being part of our community. And we look forward to joining you in the new year. So everyone, whatever it is you're doing and whoever you're doing it with, I wish you joy.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to now shift to the after party, which is Joanne and I talking about things like musical theater and
by ourselves.
By ourselves. And that's what we're going to do. So imagine us chatting away, and I'm sure the great breaking British. The
background.
Yes. Yep. So it will all come up. Oh, I don't have the background handy.
That's okay. They can imagine it.
They can imagine the after party background. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in the new year.
Bye everybody.